Welcome back to 11 Minute Lessons. It's been a while since before Easter. So today's question is, can science and Genesis coexist? Can you believe in both? You have to check your brain at the door when looking at the Bible or say science says, hey, I can't believe this stuff because I believe Genesis. So can they coexist? The simple answer is yes, you can all go home now. But there's more to it. So to claim that God created the world and all that exists is a matter of faith grounded fundamentally in God's self-revelation. At this level, the opening chapters of Genesis represent a confession of faith that God is the creator. At the same time, in witnessing to God's creative activity, the biblical writers made use of the knowledge of the natural world available to them at the time they wrote. Israel had a considerable interest in what today would be called scientific issues. The opening chapters of Genesis are pre-scientific in the sense that they predate modern science, but not in the sense of having no interest in these type of scientific questions, inquiries. One can observe some of this pre-scientific knowledge in the opening chapters of Genesis. God's use of the earth and waters and mediating creation, the classification of plants into certain types and kinds, animals into different types, the ordering of each day. All of that is science. It's interesting. Despite claims to the contrary, often in the interest of combating fundamentalism, such texts indicate that Israel's thinkers were interested in the how questions, not just the who and the why. Even if the Bible can't fully explore or give satisfactory answers to the how questions, they're still wondering. I mean, as humans, we want to know why. That's really important. But we also want to know how. From an early age, we're tinkering with things like, how does this work? We want to know. They were no different. In thinking about the world, they kind of wanted to know how it was made. And so they are going to reflect on that. Israel's theologians use this kind of knowledge about nature to speak of creation. They recognize that the truth about creation is not generated simply by theological reflection. Similarly, modern readers must draw from various fields of inquiry to speak the full truth about the world. We can't speak about the world and only use science, or only history, or only philosophy, or only medical stuff. We need to know all of that. It's interdisciplinary. To understand the world we live in, we can't look at it through one lens only. We need to have that well-rounded understanding of the social sciences, the liberal arts, the STEM stuff. All of that gives us a better understanding of the world in which we live. Now, difficulties with such an approach arise when it becomes evident that not everything in these Genesis chapters can be made congruent with modern knowledge about the world. At the same time, we must recognize that no field of inquiry, no scientific perspective has arrived at the point of full understanding of the world in which we live. So we can be like, yeah, these early Genesis writers, they thought that the moon was its own source of light. What dumbos. People are going to look at us 200 years from now and be like, those people believed so-and-so. What idiots were they? We are always expanding our knowledge. Doesn't mean we should look down at some or think, oh, we suddenly have it all figured out. They didn't think they had it all figured out. Hopefully we don't think we have it all figured out. It's an evolution of knowledge. Even the Bible shows a growth in their understanding of the world they live in and the God they worship. Hopefully in each of our own lives, we have a growth. What I believed about, the weather has changed from when I was 5 to now. I understand why we have earthquakes better now than I did when I was 10. We evolve as individuals and as groups of people over time. If our view of the Bible insists that all this information of whatever sort, including every comment it makes about nature, is absolute and final, then we're going to have to really engage in all sorts of interpretive antics to make it work. The problem is too often people want the Bible to be the book of perfect answers that explains everything in the world exactly the way it is. That's not what it was ever meant to be. It's a book of people exploring these things together. Now, in Islamic faith, the Quran is here's this perfect book of everything that God says. The Bible doesn't make that claim. When we try to make it be this perfect history, we're going to get messed up. We try to make it a perfect science book, we're going to get messed up. Often, the Bible's coming from a theological worldview, and it's telling a story. And often the story is more important than the thing itself. We talked about that a lot when we were in Berlin 2 weeks ago. The idea that sometimes the stories are more important than the events. One small example. So the Soviet War, one of the Soviet War memorials, it's in Treptow Park. It's a really impressive memorial. But at the end of it, there's this Russian soldier carrying like a German child with his sword smashing a swastika. The story that they are telling is based on a little bit of truth that yes, a Russian soldier did find a child cowering under a bridge. Of course they did, because they were bombing at the smithereens. There's going to be some child cowering somewhere. But they created this story of the Soviet saviors coming, liberating the German people. They needed that story, not just for the people they were going to now kind of inhabit was going to be East Berlin, but they needed that story in the Soviet Union too. Our nation creates stories that are not based in total fact. We want to create a narrative that has power, that influences. The Bible isn't always matched up with perfect history. We've talked about that a lot in here. They're also telling a story. It's the same thing with science. It's not going to match up perfectly with all our modern ideas of science. That's okay. It's not meant to. Our biggest problems with the Bible come when we try to make the Bible something it's not. And we try to be like, well, the earth is only 55,000 years old or so because we counted back the generations and that's how old the earth must be. Well, even the Jews didn't believe that. They're writing a mythic history with Adam and Eve. They weren't trying to actually have all these numbers exactly add up. When we try to make the Bible something it's not, we get messed up. On the flip side, people try to make it almost too scientific. I remember reading this book by this author, physicist, all this stuff, explaining, well, actually it can all make sense because, of course, time changes. When the earth is being formed, time is going to run differently because time is just mass and speed, and as the earth is changing in its mass, time's going to run differently, and all these different things. Like, you can play with science, too, and the words, and try to have it all mesh up, but it doesn't need to. If that makes sense. We don't have to have this perfect scientific textbook that explains the world. I think it comes from a sense of fear. When we are scared of the world we live in, we aren't sure we have all the answers. We want to find something that has every answer, and we run to it. That's why we run to political candidates who say, the world's scary and complex. I have all the answers. Oh, please save us. Again, being in Germany, you can see that same playbook of instill fear, explain how everything is bad, explain I have a simple plan, I can make it better. The scared populace would be like, here, take everything, just make it better. It happens throughout history. Fear is the primary driver. I think that's what drives people to make the Bible something it's not, and then beat people over the head with it because they have to convince themselves and others what they know is not really true, if that makes sense. Jumping back to this. So the Bible is not to claim that the Bible contains errors. The observations the authors made about the world were based on what was available to them at the time. We must take all the additional knowledge we have gained or will gain about the world since Bible times, for example, evolution, and integrate those understandings with our confession about God the Creator. It's okay to take the things we learn outside of the Bible and apply them to the Bible. If all truth is God's truth, if everything in the world is from God, we can learn from science and add that knowledge to the Bible and say, the Bible says this, science says this, but if the opening chapters of Genesis are a confession of faith about God creating the world, then we can take what we learn from science and connect it to our Bible and have a synthesis of a good idea. That's totally fine. You can do that with every field. You can say, well, history teaches me this, but the Bible says this. I can take both of those things together and have a better understanding. Too often we want to silo off. Well, here's my religion. It says, it explains everything, and I have to learn everything else through the lens of the Bible. I think that's fundamentally a mistake. I keep getting this ad on Facebook that's like, does your church teach a biblical worldview? I'm like, nope. And it shouldn't. Because if you're only seeing it through the lens of the Bible, you're you're going to have an altered view. The Bible is not meant to understand this world as it was written then. We too often, like the schools, say everything has to revolve around the Bible. It's just setting the Bible up to be something it was never meant to be. The Bible is a great tool to understand who God is and to help understand our lives and our world. But it isn't the only tool to understand our lives and the world. If we make that be the main thing of understanding science, we're not going to get it right. If it's the main thing to understand history, we're not going to get it right. If it's our main diet book, we're not going to get it right. We can't make the Bible something it's not. So we are not called to separate theological material from the observations about nature and seek to rewrite the text from scientific perspectives we now have. So vice versa, we don't learn from science and rewrite the Bible. We don't read the Bible and rewrite science. They both can stand as independent. Think about a grove of trees. Each tree stands independent. That's what makes it beautiful. They do work off each other. Trees send nutrients and food to each other. They actually cooperate. When one gets in danger, they'll signal the other trees. That's what I love about these trees in Africa. Once a giraffe starts eating one, it releases a pheromone to the other trees, telling it to start making its leaves bitter so the giraffes won't eat them. So they cooperate, but they're still individual trees. So in all fields of learning, we can have these individual things that work together, but they don't have to completely affect each other. We don't have to have science rewrite the Bible or the Bible rewrite science. The Genesis text remains an indispensable theological resource regarding creation. At the same time, Genesis remains an important paradigm on how to integrate theological and scientific realities in a common search for the truth about the world. And it's important to remember that Genesis 1 was actually written after the Israelites come back from exile. So they're kind of in that place of fear of, we were taken away from our homes, there's no temple, what's life about? So they write a very ordered definition of how the world was created. Because when your life is in shambles and in chaos, what do you want? You want a story of a God who took the chaos and ordered it. So they made a very ordered creation story because that's what they needed. Genesis 2 is actually the older text, and it's more about how God really gets intimately involved in creation. Because in the very beginning, the people 400 years earlier needed that story of a God who actually cared. Because a lot of the other myths of creation were a God who I created the earth out of a hole in my head, or it was an accident, or I just kind of threw some stuff, I don't really care about it. But this God intimately molds people. So it tells a story of the origins of creation that says we are actually important. And so that's scientific too. Not all science is geology and physics. Science is also psychology and those things. So all of that's put together in the Genesis. We often make it seem like the only science that's important is the study of the earth. But Genesis also deals a lot with the social sciences and even emotional, psychological sciences and how they craft these stories to give people what they need at the time. Questions, comments, snide remarks? All right, we'll be back next week for some other question. I don't remember what it is at the moment. Thank you very much.